Recognize Umbral Walker D01. Recognize the Caleb G D02.
Hello, team. Thanks for listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files, episode 14. Welcome to the cave. I am Caleb Imosib Adlofindelb.
Very nice.
And allow me to introduce Rich, that may have come off a little too Wally, Howard.
Oh, no.
Thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Whelmed. We truly appreciate you being here with us and listening. If you would like to get a hold of us, you could reach us on Twitter at the YJ Files. Our show email is whelmedpodcast@gmail.com. And of course, our website is crashingthemode.com.
Are you guys having a psychic conversation? Because I can't decide if that's cool or really rude.
With that housekeeping out of the way, let me turn it over to Rich for...
Hello, Megan.
Hey, everybody. This week's episode is Humanity. The release date is October 21st, 2011. The previous episode was just a week before, so we're back after that 6-month hiatus on some kind of weekly schedule. Again, that'll fall apart soon, don't you worry. In episode date is October 10th, which I think is 9 days after the previous episode. The director is Matt Youngberg, and the writer is Greg Weisman himself.
We also had some fun cameos here. Rob Lowe is again Captain Marvel, and Lacey Chambert is Zatanna. Fun fact, she will also be Zatanna in the new Justice League action, according to ye olde IMDb. So,
oh, very nice. She did a great job, I thought, so yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And with that out of the way, let's jump over to...
Just in time for your next mission.
Our pre-credit scene is a very simple, straightforward one and super creepy scene with Mr. Thomas O. Morrow talking to a dismantled red tornado who can only look around but can't speak or move. As simple as that opening scene is, it's not okay. There's nothing okay about that opening scene, and really, really gives that kind of old school horror to T.O. Morrow.
Definitely sets a tone for the episode, especially with T.O. and the rest of the Reds.
Yeah.
But from that moment of classic horror, we cut to training in the cave when Zatara shows up with his daughter, Zatanna. The team has a psychic conversation about the attack of the Reds and Red Tornado's possible betrayal. Zatanna calls them out on having a psychic debate while leaving her and the adults out of the conversation. The team then kidnaps Zatanna to try to track down Red Tornado, in this case using a truly dumb idea of Wally's.
We then cut back to T.O. Morrow's lab, where Morrow is telling the story of the history of the Reds to Tornado. We learn about Red Torpedo and Firebrand being his attempts to infiltrate the Justice Society of America back in the 1930s. And we get a fantastic still shot of the Justice Society that includes Dr. Fate, Sandman, the original Alan Scott Green Lantern, the Jay Garrick Flash, who we'll see later in the series, and Wildcat.
Back with the team, they've managed to secure an interview with Professor Ivo, who refuses to give them the location of Morrow's hidden base until Zatanna uses another one of her spells, which all of her spells she says backwards. In this case, she is saying, blurt out Morrow's true location.
I love that these actors can pull off these backwards lines. They sound so good.
Now, see, I don't know if they actually phonetically say them backwards or they record them the right way and then they just audio track them and flip them.
Interesting. That's an interesting question, actually. If we can get one of the voice actors on the show, I'm gonna see if they know.
It doesn't sound like it.
It sounds like they're doing it on their own.
Yeah. Backwards track sounds differently because the pacing comes out differently.
Yeah, and they're putting the punches and emphasis on it as if it's going forward. But
I think they are doing it the right way, and I fail. So
yeah,
I can't do that yet. Anyway, back to the story.
Meanwhile, back in Dr. Morrow's base,
back in the Young Justice episode,
we get introduced to the fourth and final elemental red volcano. who has been uploaded with all of Tornado's memory files. Red Volcano attacks Morrow, and we find out that this Morrow is an android, which explains why he looks the same as he did in the 1930s. We also learn that Volcano has been programmed with the power to trigger the supervolcano that is basically the entirety of Yellowstone National Park.
The team is flying to Yellowstone in the bioship, and we get a rundown of Zatanna's powers and limitations, thanks to the team being floored by her handling of Ivo. Superboy is chomping at the bit to take vengeance on Tornado for betraying the team, but Calder calls him out and calms him down, saying that Tornado should be given the opportunity to prove he isn't the weapon that others created him to be.
Burn. The team reaches Morrow's hideout, where Tornado is ordered by Red Volcano to kill them. He still has his voice box disconnected, so he can't say anything. He and the team try to deceive Red Volcano by throwing the fight, but it doesn't work. Tornado leaves to convince Torpedo and Inferno to help them against Volcano, calling on their history as heroes in a really interestingly poignant but short monologue. I really liked it.
The Reds appear and take down Volcano, but not before he can trigger the final stage of the eruption. Kid Flash's technical knowledge helps the team vent the pressure so the eruption doesn't happen, but it won't prevent the ash cloud that would cause a decades-long winter. Tornado, however, steps in, diverts the ash cloud into space, and saves the planet.
Yeah. In our final scene, Tornado explains to the team why he became their guardian in the first place, and we get a gruff but sweet recognition of Tornado's humanity from Connor. This is followed by Tornado tracking down the original T.O. Morrow, who we see as a dying older man in a hospital bed, and Tornado swears to take care of him because it's the human thing to do.
All right, and with that mission briefing out of the way, let's move right into...
Superboy, are you alright?
I'm fine. Feeling the Aster.
There's a lot going on here historically in the DC comics, and, you know, as you pointed out in some previous episodes, like, there's definitely a lot of exposition, but it's handled interestingly, I think, in this episode, and it was okay. It was okay to me. Like, it's a lot, but it also was fun for me to see some of my favorite old school JSA heroes being highlighted.
This is not one of my favorite episodes.
Yeah.
And I'm not exactly sure why. I think it might be because I don't have that emotional connection with the older generation of comics that you do, Rich.
Yeah, no, I can totally see that. It's definitely giving a lot of information, but it's not moving the meta plot forward that much. It's resolving a previous issue, but it's not tied into the light. It's also not developing much character outside of maybe a little bit of Connor and Tornado, and that's about it. So I can kind of see how this one might feel like a little bit of an outlier.
Yeah, especially with last episode really kind of reminding us about the light and that larger meta plot.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a break in the pacing, but it definitely is a little bit more of a not quite villain of the week, but
right.
It wraps up a plot thread that we kind of haven't thought about for a few episodes.
Yeah, and I'm glad it does that for sure. And the Reds sideline storyline I find interesting, but yeah, I think we're kind of on the same page. It's not one of my favorite episodes as far as a Young Justice episode, but I love so much of what they did with the history here. Red Torpedo and Firebrand were both actual characters, as people probably have guessed. Red Torpedo first appeared in the James, I think it's Jim Lockhart. I think his first name's Jim. You'll love this, first appeared in Crack Comics, #1, back in 1940. I think it had a different intonation or implication back in the day. He was from Quality Comics, was the brand that ended up getting purchased by DC. He was part of a group that was later called the Freedom Fighters, which included Uncle Sam and Doll Man and Black Condor and Phantom Woman. It's an interesting group. They actually make an appearance in Batman Brave and the Bold, I think, an episode of all things. So if you're interested, go check that out. I think Plastic Man used to be kind of an off and on freedom fighter, and in that episode, he's a co-star with Batman and the Freedom Fighters, which I found really interesting. So there was a second female Red Tornado in the comics that was actually created by T.O. Morrow. So the show kind of combines both ideas, making the Jim Lockhart character and this female android Torpedo the same character. And on the same level, Firebrand was a member of the All-Star Squadron, which was this kind of interesting comic. It was introduced in 1981. The All-Star Squadron was kind of a retcon of some of the old 1940s characters into like their new vision of what the 40s characters were like. And she was actually killed in the comics by a character called Dragon King, who we see in this episode firing at Jay Garrick, and she jumps in front of the bolt and dies. So you get this tiny little like nod to this old 1940s villain that was introduced in the 80s. The All-Star Squadron, interestingly enough, was a very early example of retroactive continuity, where they went back and rewrote the already established history of the DC superheroes that had been published during the 1940s. And that term, retcon, the retroactive continuity, the first known use of the term retcon was actually by Roy Thomas in a letter column of All-Star Squadron number 20 in 1983, when he was talking about kind of describing what they were doing with those, which I thought was really interesting.
That's really cool. That is a lot of history in about 5 minutes of screen time.
Yeah.
In this episode.
No kidding. And for people like myself, it was fun to see, oh, they put Firebrand in here. I love that. That's great. But again, I can see how it might be a bit of a step away, because it's also very heavy on the exposition. But also, an interesting little twist, I've talked about how I learned how to read comics on DC Comics, right? Most of that was Superboy and the Legion of Superheroes, but I still, to this day, like when I was a kid, I had a hard time spelling the word tomorrow for some reason. I couldn't figure out if there was 2 M's or 2 R's, and it was just really hard. For much of my life, I learned how to spell tomorrow by remembering T.O. Morrow from DC Comics. So when I say I learned to read on DC Comics, I'm not being hyperbolic. I literally learned to read on DC Comics.
Well, what's funny on top of that is when I first started watching Young Justice the first time around and they brought up T.O. Morrow, I didn't realize it was a pun.
Oh, really?
And I always thought it was Tio, like T-I-O was his first name.
Like the Spanish Uncle Morrow?
Yes. And I did not realize that it was just a punny name until we started doing this, and I was looking up characters and seeing how it was written out, and it's
right.
The initials T-O.
Thomas O. Morrow, yeah.
Yeah. So I dropped the ball on that one, guys. I missed that joke.
Yeah, pretty funny. The other thing I found really interesting about this was the history of Red Tornado in general. I can't figure out if this was on purpose or not, actually. But what's interesting is the history of Red Tornado parallels that of Ultron in the Avengers, where Ultron was theoretically created by Hank Pym in the comics and ended up turning on the Avengers. The Red Tornado was created by T.O. Morrow to infiltrate the Avengers. Ultron created the Vision. In the comics, he built the Vision to infiltrate the Avengers. So it's this really interesting, like, again, we've talked about how, like, say, Hawkeye was created after Green Arrow, but certain other, like, Black Spider that they use in the Young Justice series is clearly an echo of Spidey. And they go back and forth with these kind of things in DC, between DC and Marvel. But Red Tornado and Ultron actually both appeared in the same month, in August of 1968. Ultron technically had appeared in the previous month, but he was in disguise as the Crimson Cowl, because it was 1968, and didn't get revealed to be like this android until later. So there's this interesting echo. Like I always wonder if like the idea of Ultron creating an android in the Vision to infiltrate and betray the Avengers was an echo of Red Tornado being created by T.O. Morrow, blah, blah, blah. So to me, it's always fascinating to see how these bullpen writers were listening and reading what other people were doing, and in some cases really blatantly stealing ideas from each other and giving an echo, of what was going on, to either mock it or to think they could maybe make it better.
Well, they always say there's only so many stories you can tell.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know. This is maybe just an example where the same story was come up with simultaneously, or
it's possible. Yeah.
But, back in the day, it could have been a little bit of a, oh, that's a great idea. Let me borrow that and improve on it kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Batman was definitely stolen from a bunch of different stuff back in the day. The Shadow and the Black Bat and all of these other Shadow knockoffs from back in the day.
Phantom a little bit, too.
Oh, absolutely. Phantom. It's almost the same, oath, actually. Yeah, really interesting. Anyway, so you had some stuff. So I'm talking about the history, and that's what really pulled me into this episode. But that's almost it, though. That was the interesting part of this episode for me. So I'm interested to hear your input.
So, yeah, I do not have all that historical interest. I saw that all as a little bit of exposition, but it was handled pretty well. I was pretty much just invested in what was happening in the real time here. And there's a lot of stuff I enjoyed about it, but there's a couple things I didn't. Not to a horrible extent, but just not my favorite. Absolutely love seeing Zatara and Zatanna show up. It is no... I can't hide the fact that I love magic in the DC universe.
You've been so subtle about it so far.
I know. It's a big surprise, guys. No surprise at all here. No, I love them. Zatanna is one of my favorite DC characters. I love how she has this weird interaction with Robin, and Robin just kind of loses it over how much he has a crush on her.
She's pretty great. Being a Robin fan, I loved their little interactions. It was pretty fantastic.
And in most versions of DC, when Robin gets older, whether he's Nightwing or still Robin or just being Dick, he has a relationship with Zatanna. Not in every continuity, but in a lot of them.
Right. In the Batman animated series, they flipped it, actually, and I thought it was pretty interesting because, they had Bruce traveling the world to train with bounty hunters and different people from around the world to train in the skills that he needed, but the escape artist skills he learned was actually from Zatara, and he and Zatanna in the Batman animated series Justice League thing, it's them that have kind of a little thing going on, which I always thought was a great way to combine the history of multiple characters and connect them in a unique way. I liked it.
And with everything happening in Young Justice, I think it's only fair that Robin has a relationship. And I think this is a great way to start it because she basically kind of wins him over within the first couple minutes of him meeting her. And then she just owns him from that point forward. She throws the does she do Whelmed or Disaster?
It's be as chalant as you like.
That's it. So she mimics his kind of classic joke that he's been doing.
Right. She does it with her own original twist. And this is a little subtle thing, I think, but the fact that the writers didn't rehash an old joke, they actually gave her own level of intelligence and that own example of how her brain works. And that I'm sure Robin thinks that she's cute, but when she first shows up, she's cute and he jumps in and he pulls kind of a Wally thing. Or like even Artemis giving her that shout out. Oh, not if you kidnap me. It's like, oh, she's going to fit in really well.
Right. I think this is an example of they're bringing a new character in, but they're speeding up her development by just mimicking a little bit of what we've seen.
Or echoing.
Echoing makes more sense. And it doesn't feel out of place. It doesn't feel forced. Right. This is one of those situations where, okay, yeah, these are teenagers. They're doing teenager-y things. This is okay.
I agree.
Another thing I really liked here, there's one line where I believe it's Calder says to McGann, "Do what you must."
Oh.
And I think that is when Calder is telling McGann to basically read someone's mind. And the way it's phrased doesn't mean anything in the context of what's happening right now, but it does mean something to what happens later with her character.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point.
And I may be reading into that a little bit, and we may talk about that more specifically in Crashing the Mode, so we don't have to dance around the facts here. But in retrospect, watching through season 2 a couple times, I think this is one of those moments where it's kind of building what happens in her character arc.
Yeah.
The Maneuver 7 shows up again. Just out of nowhere. Why not? Sure.
We don't need any other maneuvers. It's the best maneuver.
The only maneuver we need is number 7. Canary taught us one maneuver, but she called it 7.
7, yeah. Maneuver one is open the door. Maneuver 2 is, I don't know, call home. I don't know. Maneuver 7's the best one.
Yeah, seven's the winner. So it's fun to see that again. It's weird that we saw it in last episode and this episode, but it shows up again. That's cool. One of the things that always struck me as a little weird, though, when the team is fighting Red Tornado, when we think that he is being controlled by Red Volcano.
Yeah.
I don't know if there is a clue that we realize something is going on before the reveal that it was he told the team play dead.
I don't disagree with you. I've rewatched this, of course, a lot, and I keep trying to figure out how they know. Like, he blew the message into the sand, but no one was flying through that whole scene. There's no way anybody would have any perspective on what that was, and we know McGann can't read his mind. So it was a little weird and a little forced.
Yeah, right after all that happens, because basically Tornado, we just see him summoning all these tornadoes and the team getting tossed around.
Right. And somebody says message received. Literally, it says
right.
Message received.
McGann says that to Connor.
Okay.
Right before they, quote unquote, start fighting Red Tornado and they all, quote, lose. So right. I think that's the only nod to it, but it just doesn't feel right to me.
It did feel a little bit clunky. But again, it's one of those things where it feels clunky because the rest of the show's so tight. Like another animated series, I probably just would have been like, oh, okay, whatever. And
right.
just gone on. But
there was also a lot of monologuing in this episode.
There really is. Yeah, no argument there.
I get it. Red Volcano is that classic super-powered, super ego supervillain.
Right.
But there's just a lot of him standing around talking, insulting people,
right.
quipping at them. It's
right.
just weird.
I have to say, I did like the meat bag, because the meat bag nod to both, I think, Bender from Futurama and also the now classic HK-47 from the original Knights of the Old Republic game from back in the day. That was a great droid character. So I kind of like the little geeky nod there, but I can't argue with you, man. Like, there's a lot of monologuing.
And the other thing I didn't especially like is that this seems to be another fight that the team can't win.
Yeah, I saw you put that in your notes, and it's very echoey of the last episode. And I'm going to talk about that just a little bit in the Canary Debrief again. But yeah, you're right. There wasn't the same kind of non-combat goal happening. Like, they were going to, quote-unquote, face Tornado, but didn't really have a solution.
Right.
They weren't going to rescue him or...
Right. This was not, we need to stop the plants, and the supervillains just happen to be there. This is, we have to stop Red Volcano. There is
right.
no way we can do it.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm not disappointed in how the show ended. I liked how the Reds came back and how Tornado convinced the other two to team up against Volcano. But it just didn't sit right with me. The fact that basically 2 episodes in a row, we had the team thrown against odds they had no chance of succeeding. And last time it was handled really well because it wasn't the main intent. Yep. This week it was the main intent and it wasn't handled quite as nicely. But there were some really great parts about this episode too. We've talked about a lot of them already. I really liked Red Tornado's sacrifice at the end.
Yeah.
I think that speaks a lot to his storyline of wanting to learn to be human. And he's hanging out with all these heroes, and he knows that heroes make sacrifices.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. The fact that Wally got a great moment to be smart to save the day.
Yeah.
And honestly, ending the episode with the jokes, that was pretty good. And I feel really bad for Captain Marvel because he just wants to play.
He just wants to be with the team and hang out with the team. And we see that a little bit more later. But I agree with you, that whole idea of Wally, again, showing off his scientific knowledge, which I think is great. He's not just a running joke, and he's not just a kind of a sleaze. He's pretty sleazy.
We didn't get a lot of Wally sleaze, and it's coming back in this and a couple future episodes, which is
a
little unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. I love Wally as a character, but that part of his personality is not necessarily my favorite part. It's okay for the humor part to an extent, but he's definitely crossing like boundaries that are not really great to be modeling.
And we've had some emails from some fans of the show, and they have pointed out that Wally's behavior is very unacceptable.
Yeah, I agree. And pointed out some really interesting things, too. The idea that in that first episode where Miss Martian appears back in Happy Harbor, they call her out for being a newbie, but they don't call Superboy out for being a newbie. You know what I mean? Like, the mistakes that he makes aren't because he's a newbie, but they do to her. It's a good point and an interesting thing I didn't notice before. And Artemis has technically been at this for a really long time as well. She just hasn't been a superhero. So it's kind of interesting to look at and try and know why you're doing something and doing it with intention and make sure you're not doing something subconsciously.
Yeah, I do not believe that Wally's behavior was intentionally antagonistic. I think they were trying to play up his immaturity and his humor.
Also his bizarre optimism.
Yeah, and that's just how it comes out. Yeah. And I'm not trying to justify it. I'm not trying to say, well, because of that, what he says that's really unacceptable is totally okay, because it's not okay. And I think the point that was being made by some of our listeners was that he doesn't get told within the context of the show not to do it. He doesn't get told to knock it off.
He gets made fun of for it, but he doesn't get told, like, a great point that was made was like Calder saying, Wally, we don't treat our teammates this way. Just at least painting it red and calling him out and saying, like, man, he grows into it and gets better later on, but he does it on his own, which is good to an extent. Like I said, you don't want somebody else to tell your character how to have a character growth moment, so you should really do it in the action. And he does do that in, say, Cold Hearted and some of these other ones coming up soon. But still, it's something not to be ignored, something to be noted. It also reflects back to, in the actual episode where Red Tornado disappears, Wally's also actually very super smart. So bringing it back to where he was super smart in this particular episode. He did the same thing with Robin tying into the EMP and that kind of thing. I like seeing that part of Wally being emphasized and being okay more than his main personality quirk being his inappropriateness with women.
Yeah, Young Justice demonstrates that Wally can be comedic without being offensive. Mm-hmm. He can be that optimism in the face of all horribleness.
Yep.
And he can be very smart.
Yeah.
They also threw in that he's a little immature and makes really inappropriate jokes. They could have phased that out a little bit sooner. Yep. Like you said, they could have painted it red, like a 2-second Calder, just stop it.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Right. That this is not the way that you should behave. Yeah.
Right. And it's one of those things, I mean, we're kind of going on a little tangent about this, but I think it's worthwhile to bring it up here. This is a show that was intended for kids to watch. This is a show that younger kids would say, I want to be that superhero. And if they see the guy in the bright yellow and red jumpsuit being really smart and being really funny and being really optimistic, that's a great role model. But having him also treat his female companions in that way, it's not a great role model. So no. It could have been handled better. I think the show took care of itself eventually because it let him grow up and move past it.
Right. And then in season 2, we get lots of strong female characters too, and it becomes a different dynamic.
Right. But in season 1, where he's a little bit younger, it could have been handled better. Not a criticism of the show. It's just, it could have been done better.
Again, whenever you're writing something, you definitely want to be trying to do things with intention and checking what you're doing, for sure. Which brings us maybe to a Canary Debrief, unless you have some more to add.
No, we have definitely been digging into the story here a little bit. We should have pulled Canary in faster. So, Canary, get on over here. Let's get this debrief going.
Stick around. Class is in session.
So we nodded at this a little bit earlier. The one thing you never want to do, as I mentioned in the last episode, is to have your supporting cast characters outshine your main characters. Or more specifically, solve the problem for them. Again, we have this echo of this last episode, so let's take a look at kind of how these are different and didn't land quite as well. In this episode, it's really cool that Tornado had this great conversation with his siblings, brought them in, like, the premise of your statement is flawed. You are never human. but you were heroes was a great tap into their humanity, for lack of a better word, right? So they came back and saved the day with Volcano, but the thing was, like you were saying earlier, there was no underlying actual goal. The underlying actual goal was find quote-unquote Tornado. Okay, well, they found him, but they didn't have any plan after that. So the writers were aware of it enough to say, look, okay, we just had the Reds basically save the day, sort of, but we're going to say that he already activated the super volcano, and we will have the team active in stopping the quote-unquote worst threat, I guess, of the actual volcano. But even that's a mixed bag because Wally uses his knowledge of geology, which is interesting, and physics and pressure. Artemis blows holes in the thing, and Robin's part of that analysis. And still, Red Tornado has to save the day. Now, it kind of works for the episode because we want to see, it's kind of proof that Tornado is really a hero. But then again, all of this episode ends up being about Tornado. In the previous episode, in Revelation, it seems like there was a little bit more purpose and thought put into it. Yes, we're going to have the Justice League come at the end because these are big, heavy hitters. So we're going to give the team an alternate goal and show them achieving that goal so that they're not being saved in their main goal by the adults. It's a thin line, right? One kind of hit, and the fact that there were back-to-back episodes really kind of shows their parallel. This how to do it well and how to kind of miss the mark a little bit. So again, doing things with purpose. I'd also want to just echo back to what we were just saying about Wally too with your characters. It's good that we know Wally and we know his personality and what his personality is, but just doing something, you should really think about some broader consequences. The girls are not handled as well in some cases in the first season, and there are things that, yeah, okay, Miss Martian's new, she's new to the team, quote unquote, in Happy Harbor, but really so is Superboy, really. So if you're going to make a comment like that, like, hit the showers, newbie, blah, 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 you should really take a step back and make sure that you're covering all of your characters and making sure that you're not making a comment that could be applicable to anybody else and only be making it toward a certain group of characters, in this case, the girls.
And with that wrapping up here, I think it is time to move on to crashing the mode.
Yeah, let's crash this mode.
Tell us something we don't know yet.
Sorry, BB. We can't risk altering the time stream. We do that, we're all feeling the mode.
As always, we are going to be talking about spoilers specifically for this episode and the remainder of the entire Young Justice series, but we will also be touching on spoilers for the larger DC universe. If you do not want to be spoiled, please stop listening and join us again later. If you're still here, it's going to happen. Let's go.
Yeah, this one didn't like we said, it's a very tornado-focused episode. So I'm digging deep. The only thing I can think of that ties into the big meta plot here is maybe this idea of Tornado's desire to be human and to have human experiences maybe led him to build the John Smith android body that he could transfer into to have a secret identity and that kind of thing, and which is key to the finale. I feel like I'm really digging deep to find a connection, a motivation between this episode and the meta plot, though.
And if we're talking about digging deep here, what I was referring to, dancing around with McGann, when she is told to do what you must, I think that is a link to really what happens between season 1 and season 2, where she does some things with her psychic powers that forces Connor to break up with her. And what we see later in season 2, where she just cuts loose with her psychic powers to amazingly horrible, detrimental effects.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we touched on that in a much, much earlier episode. Actually, I think it might have been one of the ones with another Red in it, where they were telling her that it's okay to use her powers on the bad guys.
Oh, that was the Mr. Twister episode, actually.
Yeah, so a little bit of an echo there with the Reds, again, continuing that plot thread.
Yeah.
But yeah, this episode is so focused on wrapping up Tornado storyline that it really is almost a standalone thing of the week episode. There's not a whole lot to connect it to the rest of the show.
Yeah, the only team-related thing I can think of is, besides that digging deep for the John Smith body thing, is that finally we get another female character for the team, and that's Zatanna. And we had talked about earlier about how we had this extreme, you have Miss Martian, who is your cliche stereotype TV sitcom girl for a good reason. And you have Artemis, who's exactly the opposite coin flip from Miss Martian to show that contrast. That's great. But there was no middle ground. Like, you could have had a Donna Troy, Wonder Girl, or somebody who's in the middle that showed kind of a healthy, balanced, happy home kind of a female character in the show to be a balance to these two, it's stereotype in McGann's case for a good reason, but kind of standard female tropes. And Zatanna here is that character. You finally get someone who's got a good relationship with her father. We don't know who her mother was or what that relationship was, but we know that he's an only parent, and she's there. She's strong. She's smart. She's skilled, though she's still new to the magic game. She's key to this episode. There's a lot of good things about having her in this episode, and she's of course key to the rest of this season and plays into next season as well, which is fantastic. I can't say that she needed to be introduced earlier. For sure, the way they introduced her was nice, the layering them in, but I'm glad that they got to a point where they just had a lot of good, strong female characters later on.
Well, we are pretty much halfway through season 1 at this point.
Yeah, that's true.
We're moving forward with the meta plot. We're tying up all these loose threads with Red and getting them out of the way.
Yeah.
And bringing in a new character, especially knowing how important she is for the future, at this halfway point feels okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it was a good move to bring her on. If she was brought in too late in season 1, we wouldn't have had a chance to get to know her before season 2.
Yeah.
And of course, bringing her in now makes what happens in the next few episodes about her storyline that much more crushing, because we know who she is. And just like Robin instantly likes her,
we do as well.
Yeah. Robin is kind of our everyman in the Young Justice world. We see a lot of what happens through Robin. We flavor a lot of our opinions through Robin.
Yeah.
So Robin just falling for Zatanna in 2 seconds when he's like, "Hey, I'm Robin. What's up?"
And it's believable, particularly when she's showing her intellect, you know what I mean, and her strengths and really her bravery, because she's saying, "Guys, I only have so much. I can't change the world and make world peace. Come on, guys. That's just not the way that it works." But she steps up to the plate and joins the team and doesn't have any hesitation to be a part of it. And I just love this take on her. I'm so glad they added her to the show.
Yeah. With some of the other heroes, we had to watch them become heroes through a couple episodes. The way Zatanna is presented, she's willing to be a hero within one 20-minute episode.
Yeah.
So it just speeds her up to everything that's happened in these past 13 episodes. So that just makes us accept her and fall in love with her that much faster.
Yeah, I agree.
All right, so there's not much more to talk about here. Let's consider this mode crashed, and let's move on with a little bit of fan service. What do you have for us today, Rich?
Calling back to what we were talking about Batman's history, it's probably something not a lot of people know, really, is the idea that Batman was not created whole cloth out of nothing back in the 30s. One of the best things I've read/listened to in a while is a fantastic book on audio, and I highly recommend you pick it up on audio, called The Caped Crusade: The Rise of Batman and Nerd Culture, and it's by an author named Glenn Weldon. And I want to give a thanks to friend of the show, Darcy Ross, who actually sent this to me as a birthday present or a Christmas present. And I'm about 3/4 of the way through it right now. It is amazing. So much stuff that I, being a huge Robin and Batman fan, didn't know. Bob Kane, who's the reputed creator of Batman, did not have a great reputation, and he did a lot of smoke and mirrors, making people think that he was the only person involved in a lot of these classic stories and the development of the character and that kind of thing. When artists and writers, like Bill Finger and Andrew Robinson, and all these people fed into the development of this character over the age, and seeing its ups and downs and the reaction to the 60s TV show and why that occurred and how that occurred, and then the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s and who he is now. It's a fantastic look at the history of comics in general and about one of the best known characters in comics history. Again, it's called The Caped Crusade by Glenn Weldon. Pick it up on at audible.com or somewhere on book on tape, because it's read by the author. That usually doesn't go very well. And in this case, he's fantastic. He's a great reader with hilarious voices and accents. He's really good. So check it out.
And of course, the link to that will be in the show notes for this episode, as well as on our website, crashingthemode.com. Make sure you swing over there to check out our resource page. We've got links to the other things we've mentioned here in fan service. We've got fan art. We try to keep that updated as often as possible, so you can have this great place to go to look at all kinds of cool Young Justice things. If you are a creator of Young Justice fan content or any content for DC in general, get a hold of us, please. Reach us through the email, through social media. If it's something great about Young Justice you want to share, maybe we can have you on the air here. Maybe we can just feature you in fan service. Please just reach out to us so we can continue to build and support this fantastic community centered on Young Justice, which we all love so very much. With all of that said, I think it is time to wrap up this mission and head out of the cave. Thank you again for listening. We do truly appreciate your time today. We also appreciate any comments you leave us on iTunes, as well as those 5-star reviews. It helps everyone find us a little bit faster. And as always, remember to feel the Aster.
And hashtag keep binging YJ. Also, if you're on social media, use hashtag YJ3 to connect all to lots of other people who are posting about Young Justice. And stay whelmed, everybody.
You've been listening to Whelmed, the Young Justice Files podcast. Our computer is voiced by Madison Ray. Our theme was composed by Emily Mio. Our logo was created by Kevin Bates. Whelmed is a fan-made podcast and is not officially affiliated with DC Comics, DC Entertainment, Warner Brothers Animation, and any other owners of Young Justice or its related source material. As such, these companies have sole ownership of all symbols, images, names, logos, and proprietary material related to Young Justice. Original content of this podcast is ours under Creative Commons. Thanks for listening, and stay whelmed.